kera koutou, ko Pii-Tuulia takuingoa, kei te ahoa maui ahau, e mahiana, tēnā koutou katoa, and greetings on my behalf as well. I'm joining you today from Napier, where I work as a senior lecturer at Te Ahoa Maui EIT. And thank you again to the organizers for this important event. So if you forget COVID-19 for a moment, I know it's difficult for colleagues in Auckland, but environmental sustainability is definitely the most critical and urgent challenge faced by us. So today I'm going to be focusing on the topic of climate emergency and sharing some of the findings of my new study looking at climate mitigation by New Zealand firms. So we know that we need to mitigate and we need rapid decarbonization to reduce some of the climate-related risks related to climate change. And again, actually this Sunday, governments across the globe are going to be meeting again in the UN Climate Change Conference. You might have heard COP26 mentioned a few times. And one of the goals is again to secure global net zero by mid-century and keep this kind of 1.5 degree warmer planet within our reach. And there is, as part of the goals, there is the ask of actually asking governments to commit to ambitious reductions by 2030. So we can't really wait until 2030 and start reducing. We need to start doing it now. And one of the goals is also to see if we can somehow enhance the action and collaboration between governments, businesses, and civil society, which is also related to my topic today. Unfortunately, what we're seeing from governments at the moment, the pledges are insufficient and are not going to get us to the 1.5 or 2 degree warmer planet. There was a report that came out yesterday that you can look at as well on your own time if you're interested. But this is from the Climate Action Tracker. So at the moment, we're actually heading to 2.5 or even 3 degree warmer temperatures. And we are not consistent with the 1.5 and 2 degree warmer planet. And to really reduce global heating is important to make sure that some of the risks we'll already see happening with climate change are not so radical and dramatic. If you look at New Zealand, New Zealand has a very different emission portfolio from other developed countries. So a lot of our emissions actually come from agriculture and methane, almost half. And this is not something we see in other kind of Western developed countries at all. But a lot of our emissions come also from transport, electricity generation, manufacturing, and so on. And obviously, every industry and every sector has its own challenges in reducing their emissions, and that has to be also considered. We have seen action in New Zealand. So we have the Climate Change Response Act from 2019, which sets the goal to actually reduce our emissions, net emissions to zero by 2050. But it actually is it's much less ambitious for methane. And again, we saw how important that is. We also have a climate emergency declared by the New Zealand Parliament last year. And there's a goal for the public sector to go carbon neutral by 2025. But unfortunately, when we look at what's been happening, in the most recent year, our emissions grew by 2%. This is before COVID, so this is end of 2019. And so our emissions are not decreasing, they're increasing. And New Zealand has seen quite a significant increase in its gross emissions from 1990 onwards. And we also have one of the highest per capita greenhouse gas emissions. So if we want other countries to take action, we also have to obviously look at what are we doing and how can we show leadership in this area. Talking to some people, it's Aotearoa, we don't really see climate change maybe in our lifetime, so it will be something, happening much later. But we're actually already experiencing consequences of climate change. And this is only with a 1 degree warmer planet. The rise in sea level is going to have an impact on many people living close to the coastline. And we will see more frequent extreme weather events. So when events used to be 1 in 100 years or 1 in 200 years, now they might be taking place in 1 in 50 or 1 in 10. So some of you might remember in November last year in Napier, where I'm based, we had an extreme rain event, which was 1 in 100 years event. And that actually led to a lot of people having to move out of their houses and are still not actually back to their homes because of the flooding. And I can show you what it means from an individual perspective. So this is my house after the flooding event. So we had a big landslip that actually went through the back wall as well. And luckily no human lives were lost or nobody got injured. But if you think about the individual burden and effort and time and money that goes into mitigating these kind of situations, it might put it in the context that yes, it's actually happening now, and these types of events will be happening more and more often. I promise that none of you will want to deal with something like this every year or every 10 years or every 50 years. So for my research, obviously my question was, well, what does it actually mean for New Zealand businesses? And in New Zealand, we have the emissions trading scheme, but it actually only applies to a limited number of companies quite far up the supply chain. And most firms have no emission-related obligations. So I wanted to ask in my research, how and why have firms decided to take climate action on a voluntary basis? And what are some of the tensions and benefits related to taking action? We do know that we have active businesses that do take action. We have the Climate Leaders Coalition and a number of businesses that have made a commitment to zero carbon. And there's actually a lot of literature from overseas looking at some of the justifications, benefits, challenges related to taking action. And I use that as my framework, but there's quite limited literature and evidence still from the New Zealand context. So my contribution will be to looking at, well, what does it actually mean for New Zealand firms? And I also had obviously my theoretical underpinnings based on the literature, looking at this kind of win-win situations as something we can use to explain why firms take action, or more of a paradox perspective with understanding that tensions are actually something that exist and can't necessarily be negotiated. And I was able to interview a number of climate proactive firms in New Zealand, different sizes, small, medium, large, from different industries. And I was also able to review their other documentation and reports looking at how well they had been able to reduce their emissions. So what I found out, first of all, that we quite often focus on those kind of internal emissions, so the carbon footprint. But actually, the efforts of a business have to be appraised from multiple perspectives. A lot of these businesses were very active in terms of other type of actions and they're influencing as well. So yes, they were looking at their own internal emissions, they were measuring, they were reducing, managing, and there were different ways they had been successful in doing so. Sometimes it included, obviously, new technology. Sometimes it was just smarter business and being more efficient in what you had and how you did things, including business travel, electricity, waste management, and so on. And all of these businesses had found ways to reduce, but obviously for some of them, they were already very efficient, having done it for a while. It seemed to be quite difficult to take further action. But they were also very active in influencing. So obviously with their own staff to make sure that they could meet those internal emission goals, but also to make sure that the staff knew about climate change and the importance of taking action. They were influencing their value chain. So they were influencing their suppliers and distributors. They were asking data about emissions. They were asking what the suppliers and distributors were doing in this specific area. And they were also sometimes deciding to change businesses they work with. to choose the ones that were actually taking action. And they were also very active in influencing external stakeholders other than in their value chain, other competitors and the communities, also local governments and so on. And in terms of incentives and reasons for taking action, for a lot of businesses, these were value-based. It was only seen it was the right thing to do. So it was really based on the values of the business leaders and directors. There were some benefits. These were often seen as positive byproducts and these kind of win-win situations where you were able to save money by being more efficient as well as having a contribution to brand image. And also there was evidence of new emerging climate conscious ecosystems where businesses preferred other businesses that did similar type of work. There were multiple challenges and it was really living with tensions. The key one really was this kind of business growth, emission growth nexus. If you want to grow as a business, it basically means that your emissions, gross emissions are going to grow as well. So how to negotiate that? There was obviously additional costs in terms of time and money, issues finding information, cost and availability of new technology, issues influencing the value chain, still fairly limited customer awareness and demand, and sometimes also staff reluctance. So usually staff were positive, but there were always the few who didn't really want to or didn't see the importance of doing this. And then finally, the solutions. So these businesses actually wanted to see how they could incentivize others to take action as well. From the look of the whole data, basically, government's overall climate communication is very important in really explaining why is it important to do so. We could also use more of those win-win situations to, get those easy wins and most businesses to do similar type of actions. And some of the businesses also were quite supportive of having more government regulation. Could be financial incentives, but also could be a type of a carbon tax for all businesses to pay. So really, from this, it's really the collaboration. And what I found very impressive was that this was not seen as a kind of a competitive advantage, but these businesses wanted everybody to do the same thing. So by sharing this type of best practices, how can it be done? We can actually see more businesses being incentivized to do the same type of work. Thank you.